Hello, everyone. This is Jeff from Irenicast. This week, we have a wonderful interview for you with Quanita Roberson, conducted by our very own Bonnie and Casey. And we're going to get right into it. I just want to let everyone know at the top of the show that if you have any questions about Quanita's work and you'd like to find out more about her or anything else mentioned in the episode that you're about to hear, the show notes for this episode are at irenicast.com/169. That's irenicast.com/169. And also, we are continuing on with our Continuing the Conversation series. So on Monday, June 22nd at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, we'll be discussing this episode as a full cast. So don't forget to check that out. And if you can't make it live, don't worry. It'll be here on the podcast feed next Wednesday. So without any further ado, here is our interview with Quanita Roberson.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. We are Irenicast. I'm Casey.
I'm Bonnie.
And on the first and third Tuesday of every month, we bring to you our perspectives on theology and culture from a post-evangelical lens. Thank you for joining us and for another conversation to provoke your progressive Christian imagination. This week, we have my dear friend, Quanita Roberson, on today, and she is just one of the best. I will let her sort of introduce herself and say who she is, but it's just Bonnie and I, which is a rare occasion, Quanita. So normally there are lots of people filling the sound waves, and today it'll just be the three of us. So this is kind of exciting. So thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for the invitation. So it's so funny when somebody asks me, like, who am I? One of my first answers I usually give is I'm the promise of forgiveness and reconciliation in the world. And for me, it's because according to the Dagra medicine wheel in West Africa, Burkina Faso, I'm a water spirit. And so the medicine I bring is forgiveness, reconciliation, wisdom, peace building, and the emotions. And which just means that I have a lot of opportunities in my life to learn how to forgive. Which, can be a double-edged sword. I also, my training is in, lots of places, but one is I'm an OD person, organizational development person with a concentration in integral theory, which basically is how do you look at things in a more holistic way. And so I love seeing how different things connect, and I'm a little geeky that way when things show up to get excited about helping to connect the dots. I also do an awful lot of grief work, especially these days, personal grief work, family grief work, organizational grief work. I think that learning how to grieve well actually is a doorway for us to learn how to live well. The other thing that I'll put in the pot at the moment is I'm co-writing a book called The Underground Railroad. It's a 40-day journey to remembering self and spirit, and it's designed to heal the ancestor legacy of slavery for all Americans, not just African Americans. I'm writing with a woman named Amy Houghton, and she and she's a white woman from the Kentucky side of the Ohio River, and I'm a Black woman from the Cincinnati, Ohio side of the Ohio River. And it's our stories about our journey to freedom and what it means for all of us to find our own freedom.
You're in the middle of that right now?
Yes. Not only am I in the middle of that, but she and I just got an invitation to go to a place in Kentucky to do healing work where the auction block was where my family was enslaved.
Oh my goodness.
Wow.
Yeah, so we'll be driving to that location on Saturday morning and making the decision of what wants to happen in that space.
Powerful work. And especially like us in this moment of our history with protesters protesting the murder of George Floyd and so many others. I want to ask the question, how do you see grief and forgiveness going together?
It's so interesting because my partner Tennyson Wolf and I are doing a class right now called the wisdom. It's a wisdom class, and it's about relationship to forgiveness. And the 4 weeks we've decided that the journey is the first week was anger, the next week is grief, the third week is compassion, and the last week is grace. And one of the things that grief does, and, and especially in a time like this, is I think anger often shows up as unfelt personal grief, and rage shows up as unfelt collective grief. And one of the dangers of that is that we can just dump our pain onto each other instead of actually taking the time to heal it. And one of my teachers, Jojo Palmaria, she has said that any pain not transformed is transferred. And so what we've been doing is transferring pain back and forth instead of stopping to heal it. And so my hope is right now that we actually take time to do some healing of that pain.
So I know you pretty well, I think, Juanita. At least we're on this journey together in lots of cool ways. And you have been doing all sorts of work. And so I'd love to hear some of the work that you're doing. I mean, you say you feel called to the work of reconciliation in the world, that that's who you embody, that's who you are. And so I would love to hear how that's playing out.
Yeah, so I feel very blessed to be invited into lots of spaces. One space that I have been invited to, there's a woman, she's a white woman from Minnesota, who asked me to hold space with her in a Do Better solidarity circle. So we actually have scheduled 3 of those, and they're designed to hold white people at this time and to look at what is the work, because people keep asking, what am I to do? Another thing that I'm partnering with Amy with is we're offering a emerging church workshop. It's a 3-part series, and it's looking, as we're in this place of dying and living systems, and looking at what is it that we're co-creating together in the emerging church. That's pretty exciting. The first day we posted it, we had 40 people enroll.
Wow.
Another thing that we're doing, Tennyson and I, we are doing a 16-month leadership rites of passage cohort. We recognize that in our culture, we're growing older, but we're not growing up. And we think that's because of the lack of initiation. I'll also mention at this point that there's an African proverb that says that if we don't initiate our youth, they'll burn down the village just to feel its warmth. And so, we have such a population of adolescent adults. And the problem with that is if you don't have initiated adults, you can't have initiated elders. And if you don't have initiated elders, you can't initiate the youth. And so it perpetuates that cycle over and over again. And so we started the 16-month leadership rites of passage cohort to address the issue of how do you initiate adults? And then we were stuck with, initiation typically around the globe is done culturally specific. How do you do a culturally specific diverse initiation? And so what we decided was all of our participants have access to their ancestral DNA, and they can choose which lineage they want to dive deeper into while they're in the program. We're going on a journey. We're inviting people on the hero's journey. We have 3 retreats, which the first one is the call, the second one is the ordeal, and the last one is the return, to actually invite them into their own journey. We didn't know when we were being in the middle of the ordeal that COVID would happen and the unrest would happen. Spirit likes to help us out.
Yeah.
Spirit's really helping you out right now.
Yes.
Could you say more about initiation? Maybe for some of our listeners, it might be a new idea. I think the Christian church has really failed to initiate our youth in many ways. We sort of do a baptism or a little study class and then call that it.
Yeah. There's different initiations that we come to in our life. One initiation is at 2 years old when the kids start saying me, I, mine, right? It's a level or a shift of consciousness about how they exist in the world. When I'm talking about initiation, I'm talking about the moving from adolescent to adulthood. And that to me is, I think what initiation asks of us is that we move from being earth-centered and led in our decision-making to being spirit-centered and led in our decision-making. And so it's not that we ignore the bottom chakras. I think of initiation as happening in the center of the heart chakra. It's that the bottom part of the heart chakra and lower are rooted in the earth, which still have a little bit of fear in them. And the upper part of the heart chakra and up is rooted in the heavens, which is the first time there's a real dropping of the fear. And so I think initiation is, if you think of the heart chakra as an hourglass, The center of that hourglass is what initiation is. And it asks that we make that shift so that, when we're making decisions that are rooted in the lower chakras, we will betray the upper ones every time. We'll betray our own global heart. We'll betray our own choice. We'll betray our own intuition and our divine guidance.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. You made me think of, you probably know this work, In Over Our Heads, as developmental psychologist Robert Keegan, I think, who wrote that. And it does feel like we're in this moment where so many adults are just in over their heads. They just cannot figure out how to keep up with the day-to-day demands. And yeah, initiation sounds like part of the process that they missed along the way.
Yeah, because we just keep running. We keep running away from ourselves. The problem is you can never really get away from yourself. And so it's like a kid who is hyped up on too much sugar and they're running in circles and they crash, right? That to me is one of the gifts of COVID is stopping us, trying to stop us. And actually what I found is people were still running. They actually didn't stop or even slow down. They actually started doing more. They were just doing it online. And so how do we really slow down enough so we can listen to what spirit is trying to tell us? The divine happens in the spaces in between. And if you don't slow down, there's no room for it.
You're not talking to me. Oh my gosh, Quanita. Yeah. In talking about who are the adults in the room, I don't know about all of you, but I look at, I see all the craziness happening in the world and I keep thinking, who will unify us? Where are the adults in the room that can speak to our higher selves? That's what I keep asking. And I'm beginning to realize that there are not many left. We are continuing to look for people who can lead us, who can show up. And those who are supposed to, I don't think have the capacity to, because they don't know how to be adults. And maybe that's a misreading, but I think what you're inviting us into, Quanita, is something that's really true. And that is, we have failed to initiate young people, and we have failed to teach them how to be in the world and how to be ancestors. That's one of the things that I hear you say a lot also. Where are the ancestors? Who are the people that will lead us forward? I know, especially in the queer community, there are not many. The joke is that they all went to Neverland. There's a lot of Neverland syndrome in the gay man world because they don't want to grow up. But what does that lead to? It leads to predatory behavior in older gay men on younger gay men. It leads to them buying out all of the Castro and making it no longer a slum for queer folks, but, a beautiful place for them and their friends. They fail to see what got them to where they are, and they don't reach back.
Yeah, I think that, in the program design, I often say it's not a program, it's a journey. But we do have a leadership component in it. And the reason is, we spend tons of money every year in this country on leadership development, but we don't have a lack of leaders. Leadership just means people are following you. It says nothing about where you're taking them. Mm-hmm. We have a lack of wise leaders. And so this question about how do we build wise leadership? And to me, that's through initiation. Because only through initiation do you get the opportunity to see things from a larger perspective, to consider what benefits the whole and not just me.
Absolutely. You begin to have a conversation about responsibility, which is part of what growing up is all about. Like not just accepting responsibility, embracing responsibility, seeing it as a blessing.
Yes. And I think what we think in this culture is that taking or giving shame, blame, or guilt is equal to owning responsibility. And they're actually very different things. Shame, blame, and guilt we often go to so we don't have to take responsibility. It's where we hide. We also think that shame, blame, and guilt are emotions, and they're not. I don't believe that they are. I think they're where we go to hide from emotions. And often the emotion underneath them is just deep grief. And we live in a culture that doesn't know how to grieve. And the problem with not knowing how to grieve is that if you don't know how to empty out what no longer serves you, you have no room to invite in the new. And so we get stuck in our old patterns.
So in these times, what do you imagine grief looking like? how do we begin that journey, right?
Oh, I love that question. So I was doing a workshop recently called Grief and Grace for the Southern Ohio Diocese. And one of the things I started talking to them about is that growth and development and grief happens on three different layers: the egocentric, the personal layer; the ethnocentric, the communal. So whether that's organizationally, whether that's race, whether that's gender, whether that's neighborhood; and then the world centric, this global layer. And, grief also happens on a spectrum. So you have everything from losing your car keys to losing a loved one. And so what it calls for us is to be in relationship with grief. I'm a little bit strange around this. I said that I started writing this poem one day. All my life, I've had a love affair with grief. And it's about how grief has changed in my relationship with it as I've matured, and I think it's important, that language about relationship with. There's the author of the book, Braiding Sweetgrass, talks about, in her native tongue, the language is 80% adjectives. But in the English language, we have 70% nouns. And she says, think what happens when the majority of your language is adjectives. What it does is it breathes life into things. It makes them living, breathing, moving things that you're in relationship with, as opposed to a solid one-time thing. So being in relationship with grief moves it from being an event that I grieve to being an ongoing relationship that then breathes life into grief, as well as then grief breathes life back into us. Again, I think learning how to grieve well helps us learn how to live well.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's absolutely, that the shame, blame, and guilt is often in many folks think of those things in relationship to their religion, to their spirituality. And yet it's really against it, or, it's certainly like I liked how you described it as something that sort of hides. We can hide under it. How do we release that?
First of all, grief requires community. And in our culture that we think we can grieve alone, we rob ourselves of the opportunity to really get through the grief. So often what happens is we end up wallowing in it. And then we get a little comfortable. We let go for a while. We go back in and we wallow in it some more instead of really going through it. Because on the other side of grief, on the other side of that wound, there's a gift. And so if we don't go all the way through it, we don't get access to the gift. Grief requires community. The other thing I think is one of the biggest lies we tell in this culture around grief is that we all grieve differently. I don't think that's true. I think we all avoid grief differently. And I think that story that we all grieve differently gives us permission to avoid it. But the grieving is just the feeling your emotions and letting them flow through you. We also think grief requires suffering, and it doesn't. The suffering with grief is the resistance to grief, but not grief itself. The grief itself is just sad, And so part of it is being willing to come together and hold space for each other to grieve. I'm also hosting a monthly grief circle that gives people the opportunity for us to just come together and talk about our relationship with grief. Sometimes we do ritual in that together. Sometimes it's just a conversation, but, really examining, where am I with my relationship with grief now?
So we both shared that we're both moms. Quanita and I are both moms. Mm-hmm. And I think part of raising children is raising them to know grief. How did you do that with your kids, if you don't mind sharing?
Well, I think the first thing is that I always say being a parent is a constant cycle of learning how to let go. And so that's your own grief journey. It's in every moment. It's like, oh, they're doing something new. I used to tell my kids sometimes, okay, I know you're ready for this, but I'm not yet. Just give me a minute. I'll get there. I need some time. There was a woman, when my daughter was born, I asked a group of women to tell me what advice they would give me as a new mom for a girl in this world. And one woman said, everyone will tell you to celebrate the milestones. I'm going to tell you to grieve them. Mm-hmm. And, and that has just stayed with me. And I think part of teaching our children about grief is first of all being willing to grieve yourself so they bear witness to it, that there's not something taboo about it in the house. And then also holding space for them to grieve. I was noticing when we went to shelter in place in our schools, we stopped in-class schooling on Friday and we started online schooling on Monday. And I thought, we didn't even give our kids a day to freaking grieve that their whole world had shut down.
Yeah, that's right.
What the heck is that about?
I think that it's also a part of it's a cultural thing around like bootstraps, right? You just push through, you just move through, and then you over-medicate as a way to respond to your inability to navigate grief. I don't know what you'd say to that, Quanita, but that's what it feels like. Yeah. We are too afraid to confront our pain, and so instead we just narcotize.
Yes. I have a friend who is an educator, and one of the things he says is that we've turned our learners into achievers, and the process have stolen their humanity, and they feel entitled to something for it. Mm-hmm. And I think that our kids know we've turned them into products. And that's why we're seeing the highest suicide rates that we've ever had before. When we are seeing, suicide rates increase so much, then that's not a kid problem. That's an adult issue.
Absolutely. It's about what can I get out of what I can do rather than what's my purpose? How am I connected to everybody else? That's such a sad way to live.
Well, that and that we've disconnected the multi-generations. So we figure out more and more opportunities to keep young people in communities with kids who are their same age. So what they don't know is they don't get an opportunity to see some of the issues that they're struggling with. We all struggle with. It's part of the essence of being human, but they think it's just them. They think that nobody else understands how they feel. And they don't get that adults are still figuring it out, or finding we all have our own journeys, and it's not an event, it's a journey, and it's part of learning how to be human, and it's messy, and it includes all of it.
I think that that's what makes the landing spot so important in terms of having these young people show up and be seen. Every month I have someone come and talk to the kids who is older than them so that they can hear what coming out has been like from people older than them who are ahead of them on the journey, to let them know that it does get better and to let them know that maybe there are things that are still painful. I think that it is so important to have that intergenerational relationship. I think that's one of the best things about the podcast, actually, Bonnie, is like people being able to tune in who maybe are just at the start of their deconstruction, or who are beginning to wonder about, is this real or not? And to tune in to have people affirm that we see you. We've been there. I agree, Quanita, there are not enough spaces in the world where people feel seen. And I think that is probably one of the biggest issues with church in general too, is that this is supposed to be the place that I'm seen. This is a place I'm supposed to be known. And so many people, that's not happening. And so they leave just as empty as they came.
Yeah. And I think people sometimes think that when they're leaving their childhood behind them, or the community of their formation, or ideas that people fed them as they were young growing up, that when they leave those behind them, or they're no longer working for them, that there's somehow an unsurmountable amount of suffering in that, rather than seeing it as it's the beginning of an initiation process. You're going through something, you're going to come through it, and you're going to be transformed on the other side of this, which Quanita, it sounds like so much of your work is related to accompanying people on a journey like that. What do you tell people who are afraid to get started?
Yeah.
I tell them we're all afraid. I remember even not just getting started, but I was sharing with a close friend of mine. Getting ready to take some people into some grief work. And I said to her, I don't understand why I'm always still afraid. I've done this so many times. And And she says, oh, honey, she's like, it seems like, she's like, I'd be worried about you if you weren't. It seems like there's some reverence in that, and taking people in places and not knowing what's going to happen in those spaces. Now, I'm really careful and responsible. I don't take anybody any place I can't bring them back out from. But I think that fear is because it's a sign to me. When I get afraid, I'm probably more likely to do something than less likely, because it's a signal to me that some change is coming. Some growth wants to happen. And it's my ego just saying to me, oh no, I don't want to let go, right, from the space. And so I've learned to notice that that's there. But fear isn't real. Whenever I'm in the present moment, I'm never afraid. And so it's just a signal for me to get present. Fear only exists in the past or in the future, never in this present moment. Love only exists in this present moment.
So much wisdom. So much wisdom.
So talk to me about love in this present moment. Because there are a lot of people, I imagine, Quanita, with all that's happening around COVID, around the murder of George Floyd, where it doesn't feel like there is love in this present moment. And I just want to hear from you. I want to hear about this love that you speak of. I want to hear about grief and how to move through it. Because I think there are a lot of people who are waking up, right? Like it feels like the blind man, like the scales are falling off and people are pissed. And there are a lot of people of color who are like, well, welcome to the conversation. You are one of the best people I know, quite frankly. And to hear you sort of say, there is love in this present moment and we can move through this grief. I trust you a lot. And I would just love to hear how you just hear from you, I guess.
I think that love doesn't always look like we think it should or will. Most of us are raised in places where we learn that attachment is love. But it's not love, it's just attachment. Attachment has this desperate quality to it. And so learning what it means to love ourselves and to love another takes work. First of all, a curiosity of even wanting to know. I think asking the question, the moment we ask the question, it starts trying to find its way to you. Because the universe wants to prove us right. When we really get that the world is out to gift us and not to get us, we ask different questions. Einstein said that if he had an hour to figure out, what the answer to something was, he would spend 55 minutes figuring out what the question was first. And then the answer would come easy. But we educate our children, and we've been educated in a system that says the worst thing is to not know the right answer. So we have a country that has such a low question literacy rate. And getting curious and learning deep, what's the question underneath the question? Tennyson always says, what's the thing underneath the thing, right? And it's that piece about the first question usually isn't the real one. It's like, what's underneath that? What are you really asking? So that we get really curious. And that's the place that growth and development happens. But, I often will say some of the hardest people to work with are, and I think hardest and funnest for me, is clergy, teachers, and social workers, because they're so taught that they're supposed to know. And there's no growth in that space.
Yeah.
And so can we surrender and be curious with each other? That to me is part of it. The other piece is, you're right. I think that people are waking up. It was interesting for me. I said I kind of felt like a little bit of an alien when COVID and everybody's shelter in place happened, and everybody was so afraid about, dying. And one of the things I said is they don't realize they're the walking dead already. You're already freaking dead, And for me, it's much more about how I want to live than me being afraid to die. I don't think our survival really is any of our business. I think that the trauma makes us believe that God left us. And when we believe God left us, we think we're responsible for our survival. But our job isn't about our survival. Our job is to show up and to do what you've promised to do this lifetime. I love in the Matrix, the second Matrix, where Neo meets the Oracle in the courtyard. And she asks him if he wants a piece of candy. And he says, well, if you already know the answer, is it really a choice? And she says to him, you didn't come here to make the choice. You've already made it. You've come here to learn why you've made the choices that you've made. We freaking think we've come here to make the choice. Instead of, we already have these sacred contracts with people because we've already made the choice, and it depends on which way you view this journey. Either you see it as we're spiritual beings that are having a human experience, or that we're human beings that sometimes have a spiritual one. And whichever lens you're looking through makes all the difference.
What questions are you holding right now?
I think for me, one of the things that's working me as I'm finding myself being thrown out into the world a little bit more is the Spirit's trying to teach me that safety is never external, that safety is internal. And, because of my own trauma, I started to believe that I needed to, one of the things that makes me really good, I think, at my work is when I'm in a room with people, I know where everybody is. I can feel it. And I know where they need to go for that next layer. Well, if I'm in a room with 300 people, I can't track everybody. And so for me, there was some fear in that and stepping into bigger and bigger places or audiences, because the fear is that I wouldn't be safe. And so really learning safety is never external. It's internal. The universe wants to prove you right. So whatever we believe is true, that will be reflected back to us, conscious and unconscious beliefs. And so when things happen, instead of asking the question, why is this happening to me? I ask the question, why is this happening for me? What was Spirit and I co-creating? What did we want me to learn? What is, to grow my spirit? Because I believe I'm a spiritual being having a human experience, so what is this experience trying to get me to learn so I can learn it and I don't have to do this freaking thing again? Right. And go on to the next one, right?
Right.
The other thing I think, other question that's a big question is, what piece of the responsibility is mine? So I have that question. Another thing I think I'll add here, just because I think Casey might know this about me, but Tennyson asked me years ago, what question, if you knew it, would change your life forever? And my response was, oh God, I don't know. Yeah. And so he says, what question could you live into for 2 to 3 years? And so the question I've been living into probably now for the past 6 years is what if I really did believe that everything was in divine order? What questions would I ask differently? How would I treat people differently? How would I move through the world differently? I think we say things all the time, but we don't really question, so what would it mean if I really did believe that? How would I be different? And so we get a chance, for me, for that question to be living in that question. What it means is I get challenged by it all the time, right? Something shows up and I'm like, okay, this doesn't look, because I want to, rely on my 5 senses, right? This doesn't look like it's in divine order. But we always don't get insight in the moment. Sometimes we only know why it had to play out the way it did in reflection, so trusting something greater than myself. Trusting that we really are connected. And so what that means is that if I'm honoring me, then I am honoring you. If I don't have the skills or the love or the compassion for myself, there's no way I could ever freaking give it to you.
And we can learn these things, right?
Oh, we can remember these things.
There you go.
They're already in us. And community's job is supposed to be to remind us of the truth of who we are, because we all forget. But we do just the opposite in most of our communities. We say you are what you've done, not you are who you are. So if you lie, you're a liar. If you steal, you're a thief, which just then makes us believe it, which actually reinforces that instead of saying, no, that's not who you are. Let us remind you of the truth of who you are. You're not a liar. These are the things that you've done in the past that give me evidence of that. Because we all forget, energy follows attention. So why would we focus energy on things that we don't want instead of what we do.
When we equate people with their behavior or what they've done, then what happens to the sense of belonging to one another?
Yeah. Again, I think because we can't give what we don't have, oftentimes we do that because we don't know who we are. We think we are what we've done. Not many of us sit with the question of, would I be okay with myself if I didn't do not one more thing?
Mind your own business. Quanita.
Yeah.
It's hard really knowing that our relationships that we're in, they bring to us what we need for our own healing. And they're not always easy. It's not easy. It's not an easy walk, but what it does is it has lots of gifts for us. And how do we learn to love and accept those parts of ourselves that we've cast out?
You said something about safety being internal. How do you see the connection between safety and survival?
Well, that question I have to go back for me. Our stories can only live in context. I have a friend, Shanae Swartz, who's has a PhD in narrative therapy in South Africa. And one of the things she says is that all our experiences are like all the stars in the sky. And what we do is we grab a hold of a handful of those stars and we build a constellation around it and build a story around it. But all those other stars are still up there, right?
Yeah.
And she says, and then we have belief systems that hold that story in place. But stories only exist in context. So like there's parts of the continent of Africa where the story of bulimia and anorexia can't even exist because there's not a belief that thin is better. And so for me, because I believe that we're spiritual beings having a human experience, the safety piece, it comes into play because I think that my safety isn't my responsibility. It really, or my survival, I'll say, is none of my business. That whether I live for 2 days or 50 years, my question and my focus is how do I want to live, not whether I'm afraid to die. Oftentimes, our purpose isn't something that we want to do or a calling.
Amen.
We're called to do. And I think that's by design because I think it keeps our ego out of it, which actually gives me the freedom to say whatever I want because most of the time I'm wishing that whatever I'm called to do, somebody will say, no, we don't want her. So, it gives some freedom when I'm not attached to that. One of the things I think is I'm in deep conversation with Amy Houghton in this book, In the Underground Railroad, is how do we heal the ancestor legacy of slavery in this country? And how does it look different for white people than people of color? One of the things I think is we have this misconception that the legacy of slavery is only carried and the wound of slavery by people of color. But to enslave another, there's a part of you that has to be enslaved as well. And white people haven't really recognized that they're carrying the slave archetype as well in that legacy. And the shadow side of that archetype is being a slave to a person, a thing, or even an idea. But the light side of the slave archetype is being a slave to the divine spirit within. It actually teaches us self-mastery. It's how we find our freedom. And so for me, we all swim in this water of what's right, real, and true as white and male. And until we acknowledge that and start to ask a different question or create a different yardstick, we keep recreating new systems that are still rooted in that. But if that's not your yardstick, what we consider privileged isn't privileged. It's not privileged to be disconnected from your heart.
Right.
What we even consider as being healed isn't healed. It changes everything. And so this question about what's the new yardsticks that we're creating, not just what are the new systems, but what yardstick are we using to determine whether that's what we even want?
Mm-hmm. How do we get ready to create a new yardstick? Because the narrative would have to change a lot.
Yeah. Well, thankfully we can each do it individually. We can start there. And it's just even asking the question, even asking the question, because the universe wants to prove you right. So you even ask the question of, what does it mean to look to be healed, or what does it mean to change my yardstick? And then what happens is that you'll be sent experiences that'll help teach you. We think that our belief systems come from our experiences, but it's really the other way around. Our experiences are called to us from our belief systems, because the universe wants to prove you right. And so when we ask the question, it's already working its way to us. So we can start, just by being curious and asking the question. In this wisdom class that we're doing about our relationship to forgiveness, we're talking about what is forgiveness. And one of the things I've said is, I don't think we know how to forgive. I don't think it's a human thing. I think it's a divine one. In my life, the way forgiveness has happened, I've had to just be open to it showing up. But there's no, we tell these steps to take to forgiveness. I think we can say we forgave, but that doesn't really mean that we've done it. That doesn't mean that we've embodied forgiveness. For me, it's kind of like sunshine coming through the window. So it's like, if you want the sun to fall on you, you have to have the windows open. And so usually my prayer is, help to enable me to know what it feels like to have forgiven this person. Or because I'm a pretty patient person, and so I can get really self-righteous when I'm angry at somebody, because I think that if I'm angry with you, you must deserve it. And so sometimes my prayer is, help me to be at a place where I even want to forgive this person. And then what often happens is about 3:00 in the morning, I wake up in my bed sobbing, and something has released, and it's gone. It's by grace. It's not by will.
Yeah, there's so much here to and that's a huge gift to us and to our listeners, because almost after every single thing you say, I want to take 5 minutes to just think about it and internalize it and reflect on it.
I think one of the things that I would say is that I am so hopeful right now.
Are you?
Yes.
I was going to ask, are you worried about us? Are you worried about a collective us? No, you're hopeful.
Like singing and dancing in the shower kind of hopeful.
Yeah, I'm feeling that way too.
One of the reasons that I'm hopeful, I figured out, I was in an argument with a friend because he pissed me off because he wasn't hopeful when I was. And one of the things I said to him in my angry moment was that one of the reasons we're in the situation we're in is because white men with all their privilege can't find their way to hope.
Mm.
And I said, let's be really clear. My ancestors were marched into dungeons and then put in the bottom of slave ships and taken across the ocean, and then toiled in fields and still are in bondage. I am not just hopeful, I'm freaking hope itself. And that peace without hope is a luxury of the privileged. And when we're in the present moment, which the only thing that exists there is love, there is hope. I think sometimes we think because we're really emotional at times that that's rooted in the heart. But I would suggest that maybe it's not. Because if you're really rooted in the heart, you're not in fear.
And that's the shroud, fear.
Yeah, we get so afraid because we think it's real. I remember I was doing some, we call journey exercises with friends. We were doing quarterly ritual with a group of women I used to do. And this particular time, we just were going to go into journey and listen for what was calling to us. And that particular day, I was just really tired and lonely. And I remember saying to them before going into journey, like, the deeper I go, the lonelier I feel. And I went into journey, and the ancestors showed up for me, and they said, no, you made it up. And they said, because they talked to me that way. And they said, you made it up. You're not lonely because we're here. They said, the problem with you is that the spirit world has to become more real to you than this one. And I think that, that's what it means where it says about being in this world, but not of it. that we are having this human experience, but we have to know there's something more going on. There's something bigger than us. And when we don't have that, of course, we feel a lack of hope and desperation and fear and concern.
Mm-hmm. And I think, speaking as a white person, I think that there's a huge disconnect between ourselves and our ancestors, the ancestors, and there's fear in calling upon them.
Yeah, because you have to surrender.
Yeah.
Because, I think that surrender is a big thing. I think the thing that we don't understand with the ancestors is we think, especially the ancestors we viewed as being bad here on the earth plane, but that's a human judgment, not a spiritual one, I think. We think that, oh, I don't want to call that person. But actually, those are the ancestors that probably can help you the most because they know what their actions, they can see more than now that they're in the world, the land of the ancestors than they could when they were here. So they know what their actions did. And not only that, their freedom is connected to ours. Melodoma Somé of West Africa says that the ancestors in the West are some of the most unemployed ancestors in the world. We don't call on them. And the thing I love,
so they got time. They got time.
They're wanting to help you because their freedom is connected to ours. And so it's like in Lord of the Rings, that second movie where the king goes to the ghost soldiers and the king asks them to come and help, actually demands, if he shows up, they have to, the story says they have to come. If the king asks, they have to come. And in coming and helping the king in the battle, they earn their freedom. Their freedom is attached to ours and ours is attached to theirs. They don't get to run the show. I think we have free will. And so that's why, unless we call on them, they can't intervene on our behalf. They can't just show up and start messing with stuff. And, one of my teachers, Jojo Pomerio, used to say that you don't have to be a slave to anything, not even to spirit. We get to choose. And it's not a mama choice. I always say mama choices. You can do A or B, but we really want you to pick A. So it's really you get to choose which way you do this. And we don't get to choose whether or not we evolve, but we do get to choose whether we do it the easy way and the hard way. And one of the reasons I have hope is, first of all, we've chosen to do it the hard way. We keep digging in our heels and don't want to listen when spirit is pushing us, but it'll get louder and louder until we pay attention because we don't have the choice on whether we go or not. You just have the choice of how stubborn you're going to be until you go.
Absolutely. And those big obstacles that I think we like to add layers to, shame, guilt, blame, right? We just keep piling that on. So it's even bigger. So it prevents us from having to move into what we're being called into.
Yes. And it takes courage. And, one of the things that I've learned about courage, which, again, I'm kind of geeky. So I things come up and they trigger other stuff in me. And I had a friend I was in the hot tub with, and she was saying that she had just given a speech. And in the speech, someone said to her, or she said she was looking at the word courage and for the first time realized that the word courage had the word rage in it. And she said she realized every courageous act has a bit of rage in it. And then I started thinking about that. And I started thinking about the book Iron John by Robert Bly. And in the book Iron John, he says that anger is personal, rage is archetypal, it's communal. And so I thought, what if by definition, courage is communal? And then I was telling a couple people this because it was working me and I'm an external processor. And so 3 people in a row said to me, well, the beginning, the root word core comes from the Latin word heart rage. And so I looked up at the same time I was on Port Townsend and a friend gave me a book by James Hillman. And he talks about the 3 different philosophies of the heart. And in that, he talks about the blood pumping heart, the physical heart. He talks about the heart of the matter of being pulled from our passions from the inside out, what, has us move in that way. And he talks about the heart of something, the essence, the heart of a thing or the essence of a thing. What I think is true is that choosing and acting courageous is moving from a personal individual fear to honoring a collective truth. And in the process, we serve all three philosophies of the heart. Our physical heart gets healthier. Our heart of what we're passionate about grows. And the essence of who we are is more solid.
And you think that's what's happening now, collectively?
I think we have lots of moments of it. And what another piece of what makes me hopeful about it is you can't not know what you know. And so now in the collective psyche, we have the image of white people making a line in between the police and people of color. Now in our collective psyche, we have the image of policemen getting down on one knee and asking for forgiveness from protesters. Now in our psyche, we have all these things that are happening, the policemen joining the march with the protesters over and over again. That changes who we are. You know, we can help each other remember we've been here together now. The one thing that I think is missing in the conversation, though, is we keep talking about what's needed to heal us, but policemen have the highest domestic violence rate. They have the highest substance abuse rate. They have the highest suicide rate than any other demographic. And remember earlier I said any pain not transformed is transferred. So of course they keep dumping their pain. And so until we start fighting for them to be healthier, we're not going to shift the situation as long as we have police officers. You know, but we need to be concerned because we're connected. We need to be concerned about their health. If that is, you know, the responsibility is always on the one most healed. And we've been ignoring the fact that they are the largest demographics of those three areas.
Can you just say again, who is it upon to do the healing?
The responsibility is always on the ones most healed because you can see more of the picture. You know, there was a woman who I was working with her organization and we were doing open space. So they were having individual conversations and I overheard her speaking with her group. She was the only woman of color in a group of white people in her organization. And she said, you know, I'm tired of having to teach you and educate you. You need to go and learn for yourself. And then later that day, she was helping me walk to my car and take my stuff to the car. And she says, you know, I really want to learn from you. And I said to her, well, I'm about to tell you something you're not going to like. And she said, what? And I said, you know, I heard you say that it's not your job to teach them, but it is. The responsibility is always on the one most healed. But I said, your issue is you're using their freaking yardstick to even decide who's more healed. But if you don't use their yardstick, then it changes the whole picture.
Yeah. So, I mean, the question I'm going to live with as a result of this conversation has to do with yardsticks. What is my yardstick? And what's the one that I want in order to create the world that I want to see?
Well, even
co-create.
What we think is just, this is what we do, or this is what should happen, even down to timing. I was telling Tennyson, actually, we were talking about our meetings, and I was saying that we have meetings and then we have friend calls. Oftentimes, he lives in Utah and I'm in Cincinnati. And I said, it takes me longer to get in to a friend call. And I said, my white male friends are the only ones that I know that schedule our friend meetings, like, you know, like that schedule it in a time slot like that. Like, you know, but culturally, that's not what I do. That's not in alignment. So if we're doing that, even the expectation that we would do that, being in community then means that we have to come up with an agreement of what works for both of us. And that's not always easy because diversity isn't always easy. But every time I learn something about myself, especially when I do it in a way that I don't make him responsible for what's showing up for me. You know, when I keep it clean, when I know that if something's showing up that's really triggery for me, it really has nothing to do with him. He's just playing his part.
Right. If we could all think about our triggers that way, it would be really helpful.
Yeah, I always say with triggers, the misconception, people always talk about their triggers like it's something that you're supposed to do, but your trigger by definition is yours. You're saying, there's nothing I can do about that. That's yours to clean up. That's not mine.
Right. And in some ways, when you experience a trigger, it's like super useful information. Yeah. Then you can use that and reflect on it and grow.
It's trying to help you, right? Because trauma was healed, so it'll always float to the surface. So you have an opportunity to heal it. And then you get to choose whether you're going to do the work to lean into and heal whatever that wound is.
Right. But if you're trigger avoidant.
Yes. And we can't heal it by ourselves. So there's a piece that, we've lost the importance of spiritual guides in this culture, but you can't see the water you're swimming in, right? And so we need someone to reflect ourselves back to us.
Yeah. Wow. Well, this has been a really, really good conversation, Quanita.
Yes. And timely. It's, we are in this moment together, which we will remember over and over again, I'm sure.
Yes. It has lots of medicine in it for us.
Yeah. Is there anything that you would like to close out with today, Quanita? And then let us know how we can reach you. If there are listeners who are so moved by this conversation as I was, I know that people will want to connect with you. And so how can they do that?
Yeah. So one of the things I think I would just add is one of the things that gives me hope actually is that the protest was going on as long as it has been. And the reason that gives me hope is it gives us an opportunity to move from the anger to the grief underneath. And that's where the healing is. And where I can be reached is at my website, www.nzuzu.com. And Nzuzu is Nzuzu. And there's all my work that I'm doing, I'm posting there. And it's a great place to reach out.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And I'm sure you'll find some new folks reaching out to you as a result of your time with us today.
And hopefully once your book is done, you can join the entire crew.
That'd be great.
I think they would love to have you. What do you think, Bonnie?
It would be great to have me and Amy, because the book, from a white woman's perspective and a woman of color's perspective would be really wonderful to come on.
Yes,
I'd love that.
That would be fabulous. And I mean, God bless you on all of that work. Thank you for doing it. Well, that will do it for us this week. If you enjoy Arenacast and would like to join the work we are doing, please consider donating to our PayPal link at arenacast.com/PayPal. We are committed to keeping the show free for listeners, but there are costs involved, and your financial support helps us out. That's arenacast.com/PayPal. Arenacast is also a nonprofit organization, so your donations are tax deductible. You can support the show simply by making sure you've subscribed to the show or on whatever app you listen to. And if the platform allows it, please leave a rating or a review. We love to hear from you. So for this week, I'm Bonnie.
I'm Casey.
Thanks for joining the conversation.